Flawed villain doesn't exactly look white. She has Middle Eastern looks because many Bosnian people have Turkish DNA. Some people might think she is white and some might not. Plus, you have to take into account other things like her last name. As someone who's biracial, French Canadian, and Indigenous, no, not Métis, French Canadian, and Ojibwe. Do you know how many times I've told people that I'm Indigenous and they don't believe me? But then at the same time, when I get hate comments, it's for my strong jawline, high cheekbone, small eyes. Ain't none of that because I'm French. My sister has a tiny little cute button nose. I don't have a tiny little cute button nose. You know how many times in my life I've been told that I don't look Indigenous because of how pale I am? But people don't realize that I live in Canada. But this is me when I'm tan. And this is in northern Alberta. And when I'm this tan, then it's I have blonde hair, which bleach, and blue eyes, which, yeah. Race is a social construct. And that construct has largely come because of white supremacy. Once upon a time, it wasn't considered white to be Italian. But the attacks that happened against Indigenous people to put them on reserves, to isolate them in communities, quite literally to the point where if a white population got to 7,000 to 8,000 people, they would relocate reserves. It happened in Vancouver around the Burrard Street Bridge for Squamish Nation. They relocated a reserve because it was too close to white civilization, to settlers. The whole goal of white supremacy is to make people others. And the thing is that they start off with the very obvious targets, like they are in the United States right now. They can't come after Black people because with the history that was so recent, or Indigenous people, really, they're trying to, but with Black people, they're not going to come after that because people would be up in arms way faster, including white women, including white men. Like, that is so recent in our history that if it was too blatant that way, they would be upset about it. So instead they went for Mexicans. And do you know what started happening in the south of the US? I can get dual citizenship because I have a blood quantum letter, which means that enough of my blood is Indigenous that I qualify for dual citizenship with Canada and the United States because they just put a border down. It's called the Jay Treaty. It allows me to get dual citizenship with the United States. And I have not gotten dual citizenship with the United States because when Orange Cheeto took office and they were starting to come for Mexican people, all Indigenous communities started informing each other to start carrying their status cards. Why? Because they can't tell the difference between an Indigenous Mexican person and an Indigenous Native person. Because those people, the groups of people, Indigenous people in North America, Canada, United States, Mexico, it's a gradient. You're gonna see a lot more pale Indigenous people up in Canada because it's fucking winters for so long. Like, look at an Inuit person. They have very distinct facial characteristics. They have very distinct looking faces, but they're pale. And that's because they live in the fucking Arctic. They live in the middle of nowhere with almost no sun. That doesn't mean they're white in the eyes of white supremacy. However, Bosnian people in North America, Italian people in North America, Finnish people in North America, they're in North America. There's a distinct history with white supremacy in North America. That distinct history is starting to now include Mexican people because of the president that woman voted to get elected. I would have more sympathy for someone who is Bosnian and that was their ancestry if they hadn't voted for a man that would do the terrible thing to people of color. It's the same with, I don't have any sympathy for people who voted for that man that are Mexican because they are siding with white supremacy. There's always been people who turn against their own in an attempt to side with colonizing and white supremacy because they're self-hating or they want to distance themselves from their ancestry and their history because they believe it will protect them in some way. And to a degree, and this is my own personal belief, that bothers me so much more because they're cowards. That woman can't lead anyone anywhere because she's just filled with fear. She doesn't have the knowledge or the experience to speak out against these systems. So instead she falls in line with them and acts like she's doing something when she's just reinforcing the system that harmed her ancestors. It's the same way that white people in North America try to pretend like they're not all immigrants. Canada's been a country for 150 years. Anyone that is on in Canada that isn't Indigenous in some capacity is an immigrant, but they don't want to be identified as an immigrant because that's the other. And that's even more that leans into the white supremacy of it all. They don't want to be considered an immigrant because there's a hierarchy there. And last I checked, they're not asking your last name when you go grocery shopping. They're not asking your last name when you walk into a mall. They're not pulling you over because they know your last name. Being racially profiled by police isn't happening because you kind of look Middle Eastern while your car passes them in traffic. You're not getting racially profiled and thought and having police officers think, that Middle Eastern person that kind of looks white, they don't have enough money to drive a car that looks like that, so I'm gonna pull them over. That's not happening because someone's Bosnian.